About a week ago, my partner shared a poem with me. It was written by the 10th Guru of Sikhism, Guru Gobind Singh. And the name of this poem is called Chandi Di Vaar. He said he was deeply drawn to it and he wanted me to read it. So I began casually, but after a few pages, I found myself unable to stop. On the surface, this text takes the form of a war narrative. It was set in the age of Kali Yuga, when disorder takes the throne of the cosmic order, and goddess Durga was summoned by Indra to confront with the force of the demons. But as I continued reading, it becomes more clear to me that this is not merely a story of a battle. It feels more like the description of the conscious itself, of what happens when a system reaches extreme duality. And then from that point, a self-balancing mechanism has been activated. It strips layers after layers of false identity until it returns to unity. Through that resonance, I feel guided to reflect on this story from a perspective of the conscious structure. What I'm sharing here is not a religious interpretation, but a reading that emerges from that process, an exploration of how the awareness moves through collapse, reorganization, and ultimately return to itself. Before the universe took shape, what arose first is attention, the movement that yet to take shape, a potential that carries the impulse to unfold. Within this tension, the forces of creation, preservation, and dissolution gradually emerged. Order was born from it, and the world unfolded accordingly. Mountains, oceans, stars, earth, and time took form from this operation. Gods and demons were born together. Each carries the force that moves in different directions. And the world continues to function within this dynamic tension. At first, everything is unified. Order was merely flow, and power was merely occurrence. As the operation continues to unfold, the consciousness began to turn back upon itself. What has been pure movement began to realize that it was what sustained the world. What has once simply functioned began to recognize itself as a directing the course. That is how the pride of the gods arose, and within it, the pursuit of the perfection. Attachment to what is right started to solidify, and thus the separation took another step further. Tension was no longer free-flowing. What has been suppressed started to circulate back inward, and the unintegrated force gathered in silence. Therefore, two demons appeared. Mahishasura embodied the most primal surge of force, raw impulse, untapped power, instinct without restraint. Shumpa condensed the will, authority, the crystallization of the collective identity and power. They took the throne of Indra, claimed domination of the cosmic power, and sought to rule in place of awareness itself. As the operation unfolded to a certain point, the separation reached to its extreme. Every problem solved by control. Every imbalance corrected through power, and chaos forced into order. The capacity of the mind reached its limit, and when it can no longer go further, it could only surrender to a bigger system beyond itself. Thus, Goddess Durga appears. An operation exists before will and before order. The system's natural balancing movement started to unfold. Responding to Indra's call for help, she smiled. What she saw is never an enemy. She saw a stage that's matured enough to be released. The battle marks the turning point of the consciousness. What appears as a war between the goddess and demons was in fact the process through which the old structure was being dismantled. At this stage, conflict starts to appear. The stability of self started to weaken. At first, separation, judgment, attachments obscured the awareness. What had been held in the body and nervous system started to surface during the conflict. Control starts to loosen. What appeared as destruction was in fact the transformation that's underway. As the old structure started to collapse and the new one has yet to form, consciousness entered a state with no clear reference point. What remained unseen has brought into view. Avoidance is no longer possible. There's nothing to conceal. As the layer of the obscuration loosened, the structure that once sustained the sense of self started to crack. Desire and survival response shifts first, followed by the pattern that maintains the self-identity. How experience is processed, the fear of loss, and the habitual self-protection. When one layer gives way, the others can no longer stay stable. From this point forward, the returning to the previous state is no longer possible. At this stage, a part of self still holds itself slightly apart, not fully engaged in what's unfolding yet. But when the process accelerates, when the underlying truth asserts itself, the disorder is unavoidable. Before the old structure collapses, it launches a counteraction. Patterns that once maintained coherence are brought back to the operation. A single drive takes over. It needs to remain intact. This is when the disorder becomes fully visible. More force, more assertion, more insistence of continuity. The sense of self is expanding to the limit until there's nothing left to hold. This was not a single decisive strike, but a prolonged struggle. The old will resist. The inertia refuses to release its grip. It mocked awakening, rejected surrender, and clung to control. Everything that used to define who I am are pushed into the front line. Beliefs, identity, achievements, directions. So when, at the end of this war, when the demon represents the desire and primal force was pierced through by the sword, it was not a victory. It was stripping away. Identity, direction, momentum, and the internal framework that once gave the movement coherence. Layer by layer, until there's nothing remained to hold the old pattern. A temporary equilibrium emerged. Indra returns to his throne. As the order was set back into place, the goddess disappeared into formlessness. Yet the balance is not final. It was maintained by structure. And every structure that stabilized experience quietly generates the condition of next round of tension.